Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening's webinar. My name is Ann Ziola, and I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Engagement at Doane University. And we are so excited to have you join us for this online homecoming event. The theme this year is Homecoming 2020, Focus on the Future. And we would love to see everybody in person this afternoon, but we are also being very careful to make sure everyone is safe and healthy and still has an opportunity to learn and engage with Doane. Therefore, this webinar will be recorded and shared on our webpage, and we are also live today on Facebook. So hello to everybody joining us via social media. Today, the Alumni Association is hosting this program called Hindsight is 2020, Crete and Doane Through the Years, presented by Doane historian Janet Jeffries. So just a little housekeeping before we get started today. If you are joining us through Zoom and you have any issues with connectivity, problems hearing, be sure and leave us a message in our chat box, and that's located at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. And our Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement, Mike Stellick, will be there to help you with those items. You can also chat with each other in the chat box about your own experiences or your thoughts about Janet's research. And if you have any questions for Janet during this presentation, please type them into the question and answer box at any time located in the Zoom toolbar. And we'll have time throughout the presentation and at the end to answer questions. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Janet Jeffries. Janet is the Doane University historian, and she has studied Crete and Doane history for decades, and often comments that when she walks down the streets of Crete, she envisions the past, knows where our historic personalities lived and where their businesses were located. Janet, thank you for joining us today, and I will turn it over to you. And just have to turn your mute on. There we go.
Okay, now let's see if we can get this rolling. Are we good?
It is just now starting. There we go.
Okay, I'm trying to start the slideshow. It's taking a while. So while this first slide loads, there it is. Can you see it okay?
We can see it just fine. Take it from there,
okay.
Janet.
Okay, great. So today we're going to take a look back at Crete history, and there'll be several components of Doane University included. I prepared this program originally for Nebraska's 150th birthday. And what I was doing is showing how Crete was significant in Nebraska's 150 years. And so I've updated it a little bit. And so on some of these slides, you will notice the Nebraska state flag in the corner, and that means that aspect that we're talking about was significant to Nebraska as well. I also want you to know that I am spelling Main Avenue or Main Street with an E historically, because our streets used to be named after states, and that's how a lot of the old records are. So I just chose to do that. So whether you're a Crete native or an alum who spent a lot of years here, we hope you'll be interested in this program. Crete is 149 years old. Doane is 148 years old, and Nebraska is 153 years old. So Crete and Doane really followed quite rapidly after we became a state. Settlers, of course, came in 1854 with the Act, the Nebraska-Kansas Act, opened up the territory. Homestead Act in 1862 brought tons of people in. And so Crete was right in the thick of it. This is a 1874 bird's eye view of Crete. And I'm going to show you. Here's the Doane Academy in 1874. And you can't really see this very well, I know, but Boswell is way up here. And I really think this is the Grange, Thomas Doane's country estate. And some of these places are still in existence. The little Episcopal church still stands, but generally not. So as I said, our settlement in Nebraska and all around Crete was largely, there were a lot of homesteaders, and then the people that came to start the businesses in town. And of course, we will talk about our railroader. So these are just some fun posters that tried to get you to come to Nebraska to settle. Now here is 13th and Main in Crete in the 1870s, and I'll show you a poster about this bank later, but our Doane founders were officers in this bank. So this little false front, for you who lived in Crete a while or you're natives, this is now where New Beginnings just moved to. It was Stallhut Drug, it was the Crete State Bank, and so on. So it's the northeast corner of 13th and Main. This shows you a little map of Crete settlement. Lloyd Reeves, I think class of 50, I think, made this for me one time. And it shows our two founders, well, I should say the two homesteaders who gave land for the town. And so we've got Jesse Bickle and Mary George. And Jesse Bickle had a big plot of land, and but he plotted out Blue River City. He thought that was a nice name for a town. So this is 13th Street. This is 13th and Main, and Lloyd didn't put the E on this Main, I noticed. Here's Mary George. She was a woman homesteader and later married T.H. Miller. I think Rhoda Miller. And so this is maybe your great-grandpa, I'm thinking. And so here's the Bickles, our first homesteaders that homesteaded in the town site along with Mary George. And they came from Crete, Illinois, and but they still called their town Blue River City. They called their post office Crete, though, because Mrs. Bickle was born in Crete, Illinois. There's his post office certificate. He was the first postmaster. So you went to their house to mail your letters and get your mail. And this is like a little aside. I just want some of you to know that the place is still viable. We have it as the Crete Heritage Society. We have 25 acres of Jesse Bickle's homestead. There's that same house I just showed you. And there's a barn, and I'm gonna flip through here. We have a lot of activities, so I just wanted to stick this in here so you see that Jesse Bickle's homestead is alive and well. We have our new museum on the property too, and we just do a whole lot of things there. So sometime when you're in town, maybe you can make a date and come out there. So of course we had a lot of European immigrants. We have tons of Czechs, a lot of Germans, and we get a flag on this slide because the very first Czech to enter Nebraska ended up in Crete. And this is Joseph Francel, and for some of you old timers or people who knew some of our older citizens, this is Jim Krebs' grandfather. Jimmy Krebs, who is kind of a local historian, lived up on the North Dam of the Blue River, was actually Francel Jim Krebs, I believe was his name. So this man was very interesting character. He came through Crete and Nebraska area on his way to the gold fields, came back to Crete, mailed a store that's about 12th and Main, and then married a woman, and then went off again, and he vanished in 1875 and nobody ever found him. We had the Kavarik brothers south of town near the Shustok Station site, and there's a marker there. So we had our very early Czechs. And of course we have Thomas Doane. And I want to mention that we've got 3 great-great-granddaughters of Thomas Doane with us today, Susie, Pat, and Martha. Pat Wells is a Doane alum from 1972. And so these 3 ladies are Thomas Doane's great-greats, David Brainerd Perry and Helen Doane Perry's great-grandkids, and then Helen Perry Curtis's granddaughters. And, you know, we all know of our Curtis Room. We created a Curtis Room in the 1960s, and it's had a few different location changes, but we've all had dinner there. And so that's named after Helen Perry Curtis. We also have Dr. Laura Gillot, who's a Wisconsin professor, and she is writing a great biography of Helen. So you'll want to watch for that. These ladies were all supposed to be here in Crete in July for the Doane family reunion to do presentations, but that didn't work out. So here is Thomas Doane. We like to call him our New Englander on the prairie, and he was, of course, a prominent, well-respected civil engineer sent out here to Plattsmouth in 1869 to start the rail line across Nebraska. Now, you know, we are also very close to the Oregon Trail. Crete's near the Nebraska City, Fort Kearny cutoff. And so we were Nebraska was quite the highway, you might say, west. And so here comes Thomas Doane to build the Burlington, Missouri River Railroad line. And so he, of course, we consider him a community and state builder in our state. There he is on the, I'm not sure I pronounced this right, Hoosac Tunnel site, that upper left picture, and that's him in his white coat. He was always dressed to the nines. And there's an article in a Crete newspaper that tells how he was all dressed up and wanted to double check the Blue River Railroad Bridge himself. So he went down in the shaft, and some reporter heard some pounding and digging, and there was Thomas Doane all dressed up in a fancy linen suit. But he wasn't getting dirty because he was in this sort of a box. So we really like our college founder, Thomas Doane, and feel pretty close to him, and we're excited that we know a lot of the family. Okay, here's Thomas Doane's line. Plattsmouth on the left on the Missouri River, and there it goes, and you see Crete here. There we are, here it goes. Long, and then he ended his at about Kennesaw. So it's about 200 miles, and the towns are named alphabetically, and he named most of them after New England town sites. So we had Berks. Well, first, I hate to mention it, but the first one, the A, is Asylum, which is our Lincoln Regional Center, like a insane asylum is what they were calling it. So the alphabets start here around Lincoln, but he did build the lines here from Plattsmouth to Lincoln. So this 100-mile section between Lincoln and Hastings is now known, it's still Burlington, Northern Santa Fe, the Hastings subdivision, and it's just it's a busy rail line, and it comes through serving the Crete mills, the local concrete company, and Amtrak comes through. And so I think Thomas Doane would be very excited that his line is so viable. This is just a stock picture, but I just wanted to have this on here and mention that the first train came through Crete in August of 1871, and Thomas Doane was on it, and then he kept moving west. And so all in the records, it talks about, and Colonel Doane's roads were so smooth and had low grades and really a great engineering feat. Thomas Doane built a country house south of town. And for those of you very familiar with Crete, and you would go south on Boswell to kind of a fork in the road, or toward a fork in the road, cross a little creek, and there was a house there. And in the, let's say, 40s, it burned in 39 though, the Havliceks lived there. And so people knew the house. There were a ton of lone tall pine trees that used to surround the Grange. He named it the Grange. And when he would go back, he was from Cape Cod, Massachusetts area, Orleans. When he would go back home, well, his daughter, I kind of should backtrack because I'm not really telling you a whole Doane family history, but the Grange became very famous and popular in Doane College or university history because his daughter Helen, Thomas Doane's daughter Helen, married David Brainerd Perry, the president of Doane College, and so then they lived there. And they hosted so many students and professors and all kinds of visitors. So the Grange was kind of a hospitality house. It's like the Bower House of the 19th century. Here's the interior of the Grange. And this is, and I don't know, granddaughters, if you have these, but these are in an album that Helen Perry Curtis had left in the Doane College, to the Doane College archives. So this is pretty cool. Nice kind of a rustic looking place, but it did burn down. So here are our founders. We first had our academy, and I showed it on that bird's eye view. It was down where the Crete swimming pool is, roughly. And some of you might know the Krivolovic house that sat about between 5th and Ivy, and it was sitting on a whole block. That's where the academy was, about a block north of the Crete swimming pool. Here are our founders. Thomas Doane, of course, George Lee. These were all staunch Congregationalists, and the Reverend Alley was in Crete starting the local Congregational church. So he and Thomas Doane really were the spearhead of getting this college started, but Alley doesn't get a lot of credit because he moved on to Wilbur, and he was going around starting the churches. So there are our founders, the Reverend Merrill. We had Merrill Hall, if you recall, and George Lee is one of the people that the con is named after, Whitcomb Lee Conservatory, or Lee Memorial Chapel, Whitcomb Conservatory. There's a nice view, and we are, we're a very prominent school, and we're very famous in the late 19th century. We had this small academies feeding in to our college, and so we get a flag on this one because Doane University is a very important part of Nebraska history. Now, great-great-granddaughters, I think that's Uncle Charlie's house in the background. Charles Doane was Thomas's brother, and he came to live, he was a sea captain, but he came to live out here, and the story has it that Thomas set him up as a sheep farmer. And those of you who grew up in Crete and know the area, Charlie Doane's house is the Richard Buck House, now on Cedar Road, and some of you, like older alums, might have gone to school with the young Buck. Is it Bob Buck and some of those? So that's kind of where we're looking. We're looking southeast, kind of toward the golf course area. And so Boswell Observatory is very important, significant to Nebraska history as well, because we are the first home of the Nebraska Weather Service. And we were home for the Weather Service for 10 years. Just recently, we stopped being a benchmark station, recording rainfall and so on. So we were still part of the action. The Weather Service is now in Valley. And so those of us on local TV, when you're listening to the weather and they say, according to the Weather Service in Valley, Nebraska, that's all started here at our little observatory. And so we had the standard time clock that signaled the time ball, kept the classes on schedule, and the sidereal clock connected to the telescope and was on star time. Here's our bird's eye view again, so we can see a little better. I just think this is maybe the Grange, because here's our campus, here is Boswell, just a little dirt road, and the Church of God was the former Lutheran church. And many of you who went to Crete High or were around Crete and at Doane during the 70s, and well, you would know there was a little white church on the corner on Juniper, and it was the old Lutheran church before they built the 1950s Lutheran church on Hawthorne. The Episcopal church is still there. Little baby Episcopal church. Here's the depot, here's the Bickle house. And so you can see this is 1874. Bird's eye views were pretty popular. A lot of towns had them done. So here are Theodore and Mary George Miller, and Rhoda, I think these are your greats. I'm not sure, I don't have your genealogy out, but their father, Ludwig George, lived north of Crete, I could say on the dump road on Boswell, North Boswell. And so they had a lot of homesteading in their family. You can't really read this map very well. I don't know why it doesn't show up good on the slide. It looks pretty good when it's very small. But this is the official map that Anselmo Smith made. He was the surveyor for the Burlington, Missouri River Railroad and worked with Thomas Doane on the road. So then he was plotting out the towns. And as I mentioned, the north-south streets were named after states, although Boswell was named for Charles Boswell then at one point. He donated the money for the observatory. Maine was Maine after the state of Maine. So it's cool that the streets from Maine east were named for the eastern New England states, and then west where they were like Kansas and Illinois and all this. So Hawthorne, for reference, is really Rhode Island. Forest Avenue was Pennsylvania Avenue. They changed the names to trees in the 20s, something to do with mail delivery. So I don't know. I throw in this 1887 map because we started to get prosperous, and our local commercial club had this made, like a Chamber of Commerce sort of a little promotional thing, showing a few beautiful homes and the two mills and all of that. Now here is another important fact about Crete. We were the home to Governor Dawes. And so I've got some words here on the screen if you want to read them. But he was a two-term governor, but he was very early settler. As you see, 1871 he came, he had a general store, he was a lawyer, he did all kinds of community activities, and then he did go off and live in Lincoln during his terms of governor. And I remember reading that one of our local polka bands went and played during his inaugural parade. His house still stands. This is, I'm going to say 10th and Grove. And so one of his really wonderful claims to fame is he really spearheaded the establishment of the Nebraska State Historical Society. Chautauqua is another important feature of our town. Tuxedo Park was Chautauqua Park originally, and this is Tuxedo Park here in this lovely map. And we were created, our Chautauqua Park was created just 8 years after the original movement. And so we had this great park designed by the original designers who plotted the New York Chautauqua grounds. Famous people came, as I mentioned here, William Jennings Bryan, Willa Cather, they all came and participated in the assembly. And our Doane, I'm going to say college when it's appropriate, but Doane College and the Crete leaders platted this map. The names of there's Doane Avenue, there's Stevens Avenue, and all kinds of things on the map, and then they did tons of fundraising. Here's some more buildings. Many of you will remember this octagonal building. These other buildings kind of left us. The Press Association stood till about 1964, would be soon after you cross the river to get into the park. But when you cross that Blue River Bridge, you would turn left and you go up the road. There's a fork here in the road, and the 8-sided building sat there, and that was the office, and you would buy tickets there. That building is still extant, but they've moved it off to the north. And we'd kind of like to move it to our museum. The Fair Board doesn't have a real serious use for it, so maybe we'll do that someday. Now we're going to town, and in this little walking tour, we're not going into the neighborhoods. That could be another show about the houses in the neighborhoods. But some of you will remember this building was just torn down last year. A little lone false front building on North Main. And it was the home of a cigar shop, carpentry shop. Charles Bowlby taught school in there. And so this was just this had so many uses and was such a landmark, but it got really dilapidated. And we're going to have a few views of Maine. Now, we're looking north on Maine. And to orient you, this tall building here, and all of you who might have gone to movies at the Times Theater, we are on the corner of 13th and Main here. Here's where our little false front bank building was. And see, now they have a new, more modern bank. But this is the Opera House, and we'll keep remembering that because that's our kind of a pinpoint landmark. And on the site now is the Great Western Bank, the parking lot, and so on. So this is looking north. We'll just flip through a few. Same view, colored, a little bit colored, and showing the bank's always kind of had a corner door to welcome you if you were happen to be coming from 13th or coming from Maine. A lot of banks, you'll notice in towns, have kind of a corner entry. East side of Maine. Okay, now we are down south a bit. And for those of you familiar today, this is Artisan Mark Coffee Shop. This was Hoyer Drug right here. And you can't quite see the Opera House, it's hiding back here. So this is now 12th and Main. 13th is up here. And often they would have a gazebo. This is back at 13th and Main for special occasions, 4th of July. And look at the ladies, they're all dressed up over here on the sidewalk. And so here's our Opera House again. Now we're back to 12th. And here is the first City National Bank. That still stands. This is Ben Franklin for most of our days growing up here. These are the Ben Franklin buildings. And another view. Some of you might say, gosh, I'm seeing this over and over again, but you know, I'm drilling it into you. So here's our corner bank at 13th and Main, State Bank of Nebraska. Many of you will remember the creamery. The building was standing for quite a long time, but the operation did close in 1960. But this was huge, and it deserves a flag because it was really put Nebraska on the map, and here it was in Crete. Now, it started down the road in Thomas Doane's little town of Fairmont on the rail line in 1884, but then when they needed expansion, we were the first town to get the expansion site, but then it was a nationwide operation. And they made everything. As you can see, they processed cream, milk, eggs. They did some food packets for World War II. And then the cool thing is the warm water from the plant was feeding into our swimming pool, which we'll see later. Crete Mills. We had two locations and they started kind of separate, but soon consolidated. And so the south location is down at about 3rd and Norman. And many of you will remember the lower dam that was there for a long time. And there was an old Boy Scout cabin across the river and people would go hiking down there. The North Mill is the current location roughly. So that's the North Mill. We were so prominent. Even in the 1880s, the Crete papers said that they were shipping flour to Europe. And so we were long time, went by the title of Victor Flour, Victor Feeds, Victor Corn. Now it's a corn mill, and so primarily, and this is really neat. This is a 1930 picture, and as this note says, it's now part of Bunge Milling. And this is from Julie's Raskershek's of the Advancement Office. I check in with her husband every now and then to get the real facts because he is he's running the mill. And so he was telling me this, 50,000 bushels of corn per day. And it's for the snack food industry primarily. So here we started in 1869 as a sawmill, and that was up north on the north side. Then it became a grist mill in 1870, but this mill is right on the rail line, and Eric told me that it receives about 10 to 30 rail cars daily, depending on the contracts and the shipments. But this is a cool thing. It was a destination at Christmas. It would light up, look at the Merry Christmas sign and all the lights. And when my mom was little, they would purposely drive in from the country to see the mill. And so that's pretty cool. Here's a cool view, 1941. And it's expanding. It's looking a little bit more like it does now. And they've got their Victor sign up here. And these are some garden plots. for wartime garden plots that they let the townspeople have. And here's the old dam from the North Mill. Now, this isn't obviously water power by the 40s. Now, here's another important fact about our Thomas Doane and Nebraska. Thomas Doane, when he came and was doing the rail line and then subsequently working on the campus on the hill that we know, he was constantly wanting to plant trees. And we had a local nurseryman, E.F. Stevens, and he was growing little trees south of town near the Grange, actually. And so Doane had him plant the campus and also do his windbreaks. And so all along the rail line, Stevens was planting the windbreaks. And I think it's interesting that Thomas Doane's father, John, was also an early arborist in this country, in Massachusetts. And I would like to think, the relatives can correct me, that since John liked reforestation and horticulture, that he passed it on down to the kids, Thomas, Charles, and Mary, who we'll meet next. But you see that in the records, it is evident that Samuel Andrews, who built the house that David Osterhout lived in for so long, and now Marty Fye lives in it, they were all helping with these experiments of seeing if deciduous trees would grow on the plains. So I saw some evidence and some letters that Thomas Doane had attended several conferences and met J. Sterling Morton, the founder of Arbor Day. J. Sterling Morton is from Nebraska City. We're going to see his house on our Doane family reunion tour. We didn't get to go this year. But anyway, so they attended conferences, and pretty soon they were sharing seeds back and forth. And so Nebraska is the home of Arbor Day. We are kind of like to think we're a part of that because our Thomas Doane and his friends and relatives were planting too. And we are a statewide arboretum, the college is, or the university is. And I wanted to introduce you to Mary. Mary's Thomas Doane's sister, and she would come to visit Charles and Thomas various times, and she was a fabulous watercolorist. And here's just a few samples. I think Susie sent me this picture of Mary at her birthday party at Orleans, Massachusetts. And so these pictures of her watercolors that I'm showing you now are from the Crete area. So when she would come, she would paint, and then she's got, you can't really see, but she's got where they were written here and the Latin names. And she was excellent, and probably at a different time, she would have had quite a career. Here's another important aspect of our history, our Douglas Manufacturing Company. And I don't know if Roger Douglas is tuned in or not, but he was the last one to be operating until it closed in 2015. But his grandma, Elizabeth Robb Douglas, I think it's the grandma, not the great, founded this. In the night, she had a dream about how to make a collapsible voting booth. I don't know why she was thinking about voting booths exactly and concerned, but she came up with this voting booth. We have one at the museum here, one of the older ones. And it just became an international success. And they expanded to do ballot boxes and other election equipment. And it was a nationwide and international business founded right here in Crete, north of the mill, north of the Crete Mill. And she's like, was inducted into the Nebraska Business Hall of Fame, one of just a few women. And so that's Elizabeth. I mentioned, I've got JR and George Stevens here because I wanted to point out that Crete was very progressive. And I don't know if it's because our founders were hanging out with the Lincoln, you know, we were close to Lincoln. You could get to Lincoln in about 15 or 20 minutes on the train, maybe not back in the 19th century, but in more recent times. And so J.R. Johnston and George Stevens were always trying to better the community, and they built this utility plant to generate electricity. And some of you who grew up in Crete and made homecoming floats for high school and so on were in this building, but it didn't look this great. This is north of where the Dairy Queen is, at about 18th and Kingwood. And by the 60s and 70s, it was just a one-story brick building, and sometimes the city would let the high schoolers make floats there. The city still owns it. It's now the city dirt pile area. But anyway, they had a big plan and it worked, and they had a big, large reservoir on College Hill, which they call the hill leading up to Boswell, so that water would run down. And so they worked on it for several years. They erected the building, and then they sold it to the city. It's all torn down now. We also had a phone line going between the Crete mills and the newspaper office for the hottest news. So here's our new modern depot, 1905. This is a depot a lot of us would remember. It was torn down in 2011. Now we're back to Maine for fun. Looking south on Maine, we still have a few false fronts here. That little building that I showed you that it was torn down just recently is off the screen here. Our opera house is hiding here. This is kind of not a very good shot, but it's fun to look at what Crete looked like. This was Bonnie's Hideaway, gorgeous First National Bank. There's a barber in the basement now, but in the 50s and 60s, this was the public women's restroom down these steps. Some of you might remember. And this is the pool hall, where the pool hall was in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s on. Here is a bunch, something hot's going on here at the Opera House because they have it all decorated up. Now we're looking back to 13th and Main. Here's our bank with the corner door. And in the era of some of you being at Doane, this is JCPenney's. This is where the JCPenney's store was. All these Oreo bay windows are gone. But anyway, I wanted to also mention that the Kunzel family undertaking business was part of this in the early days, and they were upstairs until they moved to their own building. And this photo is dated 1941. They have a lot of older cars in the picture, but maybe they couldn't afford to buy new ones. But anyway, we're right here at the Opera House again. We're at 13th and Main. And look at, we have a street light here. And then they took a bunch of pictures showcasing the new lights, traffic lights and street lights. So now it's 1941. Here's Kunzel Furniture and Undertaking now in what some of us might remember as Brown McDonald's, the McDonald's department store. Here's Ben Franklin. A lot of you will remember Ben Franklin, but it expanded. So now the Brew House, our newer store or restaurant, is here. And Francel descended from that wanderer, that gold hunter. His son did painting, and he was very well known, and people wanted him to paint ceiling motifs and everything, and he would just paint your plain house too. They were south on Main, and I need to go to the courthouse and find out exactly where it was. And then this is a familiar site now because the 9th Street Grill is here on that old rail line on the Missouri Pacific track that came up from Kramer, Nebraska. And so John Rothmuller had his company here, Grain and Coal. Now we're standing, the post office is on our left. I'm assuming a lot of you remember what Crete still looks like, kind of when I give these landmarks. Here's our Opera House. It's getting kind of stripped of its details, but there's our Opera House. Here's the bank with the corner door, and this is 13th and Main. Here's our Opera House. So it was very old, 1877. And Dr. Band built this Opera House, but he had his doctor's office up here, up these steps. And he had his drugstore down here. So a lot of us remember, here's the Times Theater. It got covered over with plaster. It still had a few details. And then First Federal tore it down in the late 70s, and we fought it kind of a lot. I was at the State Historical Society then. I remember writing a letter to the the CEO of the First Federal saying, why don't you restore it and have your drive-through in the back alley and et cetera, because it needed a lot of work. And here's our corner bank, Crete State Bank building, and it got quite the facelift. The brick is under there, but they squared it off. And here's J.C. Penney's. Now, here we are at Hugh McCarter's Implement Building, and you might all recognize it from the mural. So this mural that was painted by Echo and Jeff Easton and Greg Holdren is on this wall now, and it's now the Taekwondo shop, or I'm not saying it right, and I think Susie's on, but you have a different name now, but you can get physically fit here. Here's the back of the Opera House, and there's Hugh with his horse. And you could get a buggy there, and he had a harness and all kinds of things. This building in more recent years was Malone's tax office, but it was the Znamenachek implement shop. And we have the ISIS, and it gets a flag, and we'll learn a little more why, but the ISIS was quite the modern up-and-coming theater built in 1926. And a lot of features we won't go into, but the Nebraska state flag was unveiled here after our Mrs. Miller, which we'll talk about in a minute, designed it. Then the opening and the unveiling was happening at our ISIS theater. And here's everybody all excited about the new ISIS theater. They came out of the Lyric. Here's the Lyric. Now this is the VFW area. So the Lyric, it's kind of bricked over and everything. It's not a false front anymore, but the Crete VFW Club, now called Veterans and Friends, is in these two buildings. And so the 1915 Lyric was more of a silent movie. And there's a lot of history with the ISIS. You can call Tom Reeves in the advancement office and talk all about it, or I've got some more information too. But it's very interesting, very modern theater. The designer had been to California and got the latest. So here we have theaters directly across the street from one another. And here they are. Here's our ISIS, and here is the Lyric. And they operated simultaneously for a while. Here's a shot of the Crete Mills. I'm showing you the service station, but it's a great shot of the Crete Mills too, because there was this little service station on the corner for the longest time. Now the mill has, really bought up so much of the property because they need it. And Parker Lumber was on West 13th, and many of us, we were going there as kids, and so you'll remember that. We had a brewery down the street on 13th, and if you remember, and I don't remember when it was gone, but the bottom of this round tank sat there for a long time. Now trucks who are dumping corn at the Crete Mills are lined up there. So we had a brewery, and probably this should have a flag because I know they shipped it all over the state. Blacksmith shop still standing but hiding under a new face, and it's on West 13th. Now it's Basic Body Works. Now, where this coffee cup is, this is like Dorsey's Cafe and Heidi and Harold's and so on. The Opera House is down here with its new white stucco face. And this is Pinnacle Bank. And it was Crete State Bank too for a long time, but you can see the shape, it's still just like this. It was a Ford garage, and you could buy a new car there or get your car serviced. Crete Telephone Company is still standing right here. We used to have a shoe repair there, and of course the operators sat up there when you called in. They said, "Number, please." They were sitting there plugging the little cords in, and so Mr. Miller, Benjamin Miller, ran our phone company, and he founded it in 1907. We'll take a look at City Hall. It's a pretty cool building. And the frame City Hall used to be the high school, and it was down on the school property where those of you who graduated in the 60s and 70s, well, 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was kind of right there on the old high school property. They moved it over here to be a city hall because they didn't need it, because we had old 88, the high school was built, so they moved this over to be the city hall, and it sat right where our city hall is until they tore it down to build a new one. Now, this is very weird during this pandemic. Look what the date is, and what are these people doing here like this? This is October 18, and I read the Crete News, and I need to go back because obviously something exciting was going on, and they weren't afraid of the flu. But when you read our Crete papers and when you read the Doane Owls, people were dying in Crete of the Spanish flu. So I have no idea what these people are doing clustered like this. So this is that high school, City Hall. This is where the post office is now. This was our fire bell if there was a fire. And so like I say, I'm not sure what's going on here. But look at our lovely new post office, 1931, new post office. I should mention that the Crete papers from 1871, May of 1871, when the Saline County Post started, until December of 2017 are now all online. And if you need the link, I don't have it memorized, but it was a joint effort between Doane University, our Crete Heritage Society, and the Friends of the Crete Public Library, and we all kept chipping in or getting donations, and it cost about $20,000, but anybody can look, and it's fabulous. Here's our library situation. You know, we just lost our Carnegie Library. Here's a new picture of it when it was barely finished. And then this is what it looked like, you know, before the addition. And now this is our new library on the site of the Crete Hospital, the 1950 Crete Hospital site. We're looking, some of you know the pool hall. This is what it used to look like. I showed you that picture before, and now it's a Bauer Insurance, and it's got some new fronts. And this is interesting. So here's our bank corner that I keep talking about. Here's the 1872 little bank. Then by 1890, J.R. Johnston was president of our utility fame man. And they built this new building, and here it is to about that same time period. This is what it looks like now. And now New Beginnings moved in, our thrift shop. But what's very interesting is most of these, you can't probably read this, but Johnston and his buddy George Stevens and Dr. Band of the Opera House were directors. But the rest of the directors, Thomas Doane was a vice president, David Brainerd Perry, Charles Watson Doane, and this C.C. Stearns were all officers, and Stearns is Charles Boswell's stepson. So we've got 4 Doane people involved, and luckily they got the heck out of the situation, because in the 1890s there was a scandal, and that could be another whole program, where George Stevens disappeared, and we think JR killed him, and it's a long story. There's a rumor that he's buried under this bank building, but luckily all of our Doane people were well away from the bank by the time this hit. Now here we are at, this would be Buchanan's drug for some of you, Flaster and all, and this is 13th and Main. Eddie Steidel built it, and he was very entrepreneurial, and his cash register receipts printed in Czech, German, and English, so that everybody could have in their language. And this is what it looks like now. It's all fixed up. It's a Hispanic store. There's our hospitals. This still stands. It's an apartment right across the street south of the Episcopal Church. It lost its porches. It's pretty plain. And then we have our 1950 hospital, which is now it's gone, and it's the site of the new library. And then here's our modern hospital. And back to the swimming pool talk. So here we are. Here's our fire station. Many of you can identify with this. This is where the fire station was, in this swimming pool. This house still stands. This house right here is over here by the fire station. And the water fed in, because here's the Crete Mills, creameries over here, and the water was piped somehow under and fed into the pool, so it was heated pool. There was a waterfall or fountain here. And again, older people like Mom's age, who's 91, this was a big treat if you got to come to Crete and swim in the really cool pool. North Main, again, we've got the creamery, and then the station, all on North Main, and this sign, Crete, home of Doane College, was always on the track. And Harold Jones, our local collector, our late local collector and railroad expert, saved this sign. And we have one at our museum, and Edward Jones' office, Tom Sorensen, has one down there. Another hot thing happening in Crete was George Gregory, father to Anna Dore Gregory, who wrote our one history book, created this sort of a home ec plan, and he published it, and it was used in all kinds of Nebraska schools. And he had housewives come in periodically and teach the girls how to cook. And so anyway, and they did it here. This is Old 88, our high school. And so he was really quite the innovator. He was superintendent, and he also created this garden club in 1909. And the teachers would give the little kids seeds for the summer, and they'd go home and plant them. And then they'd have to tell about it later when they came back. This, some of you will remember, across the street from the quads on 13th Street, Prucha Cedar Zoo. This is what it looks like now. So here's the original Prucha house. It's hiding back here. And this Czech guy, Prucha, had planted all these cedar trees. He was quite an artist, and he did topiary work. And this appeared in Life magazine in the 1940s. And after he died, and there were postcards, and this was a destination. You would drive to Crete to see this. This was really something. When I was little, they were growing out, and the problem was his son Otto was allergic. He was talented too, but poor guy was allergic to cedar. So he tried to keep up the work, and it just didn't quite. Early 60s, the sculptures were gone. And here's Mrs. Miller, wife of the telephone man. She designed our current flag, and they lived right here in Crete on 13th and Forest. It's a blue house now. And we had this yellow flag before, and then the state put out a contest, and so her flag was adopted in 1925. As I said, it was showcased at the ISIS, and she was called a club woman. She was in the DAR and everything, and she wrote a few songs, and she wrote about our flag. And she also created the idea of the living Christmas tree. You can Google this. We had a few living Christmas trees by our Crete Library. One got vandalized, one died, and now there is one in our park dedicated in 2015 in keeping her memory alive. So you can read all about Mrs. Miller, and there's a flag here because it's actually a national thing. President Coolidge, former President Coolidge, even got in on the act and had one sent. Some churches, here's our Lutheran churches, little Episcopal church, and here's the Bethel that turned into this. This got built, and they moved the Bethel. This is the Bethel. They hooked it on the back, and that's the one that's at 11th and Ivy. Congregational, affiliated with the university or Doane College. Sometimes commencements happened here when it says First Congregational Church, it is our first one, but it's also the name, First Congregational Church. So there were commencements happening here, Doane's commencement. We have our little German Congregational Church, and then here's the new, I say new, more modern one that we still use. And we had two Methodist church, Czech, and our current church, which still stands. It's lost some of its details. And our Catholic properties, because of course we were very Czech, we still are very Czech. So here's St. Ludmilla's Catholic Church, 10th and Hawthorne. It's no longer there. And here's the current church. And this is what it looks like now with the new parlors. Now, I'm bringing up the Wednesday Club because we are the oldest women's club in Nebraska, still active, and many of these ladies are Doane people. And so they get a little play here. Margaret Thompson Sheldon of Sheldon Hall. Here she is in her office in Gaylord Hall. And the Reed sisters were, I think some of them went to Doane, but they lived in this house that looks like this now. And so, and Gertrude Brown worked in the alumni office, and her dad was John Sewell Brown, who taught at Doane. And so these Wednesdays, here's Dr. Gregory, who wrote our history of Crete. Here's what the book looks like. It only covers to 1888, but she did a fabulous job. Here is Florence Foss Bauer of the Foss family, and she's of the Bauer house, our president's home descent. And Fayette Foss's house is still there, all stripped down. It was a beautiful Italianate. And here is Dr. Gregory's mom. She was in the Wednesday Club too. And this is where the Gregorys lived. So more Wednesdays. This house is still there on 722 Forest. And this is the old, I believe, Craven house. And Carrie Dean of our Dean family, the Dean and Dean architects, lived there. Here's Jenny Stevens, George's wife. She was an original Wednesday, and her house still stands. Poor Jenny, that's, like I say, another long story. When George disappeared, nobody gave her a tombstone or a marker. So we modern Wednesdays had a funeral for her out at the cemetery. And here's Alice Eister, and she was a Wednesday and did things at Doane a lot. So this kind of ends our show, going along with the theme, focusing on the future, which we think Crete has a promising future, but we think our past is pretty interesting. And if you want to read more about it, I mentioned the Crete News online, and then we don't have a real comprehensive, definitive history. Oh, here, I do have here's I can send that to you. You can't really read it, but here's the website. And of course, we've got Don Ziegler's book, College on the Hill. We've got Saline County Roots. You know, there's a few things, and this is a wonderful history of Doane, written by the children of the founders. So, you know, it's very accurate. And then this is good Catholic history. So any questions, or Anne, do you have anything to say?
Sure. I'll take it from there. Thank you, Janet. We will go ahead and take some time for questions. We want to recognize everybody's time, but I know some of you probably have some burning questions for Janet. So we'll take just a few moments. And as a reminder, if you're joining us on Zoom, please be sure to type your questions into the question and answer box at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. Or if you're joining us from Facebook, you can leave a question in the comment section. So while our audience is writing questions, Janet, I just want to make sure and thank you again for joining us today. I always enjoy hearing your stories, and even in our Zoom practices, they play out like some soap opera of murder and embezzlement and disappearances.
I'll tell you, we should talk about that bank scandal sometime, maybe a future. Maybe there could be some scandals of Crete and Doane. I don't think Doane has any scandals. So.
Well, you know, I'm always looking for different content for our alumni events, so I will hit you up on that. So a couple of questions have come in. This one is from Abe Gotiner, and he says, has the Crete News had different locations over the years?
Yes, and maybe Ann Reeves might be on, and Tom, but they were on 13th Street. Well, first, the Saline County Post, I should have mentioned that, was in the upstairs of Eddie Steidel's drugstore on 13th and Main. Now, the Saline County Post genealogically turns into the Crete News. But then for a long time, the news was on 13th Street. I don't know if it's the building where the beauty parlor is, but it's like across from Heidi and Harold's, if those of you from the 70s and 60s. And Abe's, happy 50th anniversary to some of you that are on. I know Abe's one of the class of 70. But anyway, so yes, and then, but I am not sure then if, so there were just 3 locations, the old original and how long they were on 13th, and then now at their current location. So maybe we can hit up some of the family about that.
Sure, sure. And Tom is on the call today, so I'm sure he might have some comments to put in the
Yes,
chat section too.
that'd be
Uh,
great.
it looks like we have another question from Katie, and she says, Janet, what do you think is the best historic site or site still standing in Crete?
Oh, man. That's kind of tough. I mean, probably it's remarkable that we have Jesse Bickle's house, and I really kind of didn't mention, but his log cabin is under there. His 1864 cabin is under that Carpenter Gothic house. And so that's a little bit remarkable that that still stands. You know, we've got 2 historic districts. We've got College Hill and Doane College Historic District. But College Hill's gotten kind of, we have some fabulous homes. But as far as the most significant might be that log cabin that survives, and you can see the logs when you go into some back rooms and in the basement. So I'll probably think of a better one later. But
That's okay. That's a good favorite for you. And I have to let you know there's been a lot of comments here today in the chat section all throughout your presentation. And there are a lot of people that are very interested in Crete's historical scandals, about the ghosts of Crete. So I think there's something in the making there that we can do. There's
right.
also one more that came in earlier today, and that was a question from Abe wanting to know if the Times Theater is in the same location or was in the same location as the ISIS Theater.
No, because in his day, did we have both of them running? So the Times was on Main Street in that Opera House building, and then the ISIS was where it is on 13th, so just around the corner. So seems like for a short time, see, I'm getting forgetful too, but they were both operating. And so Times was in the Opera House, you know, facing east,
Right.
on Main Street.
Right. And would you say was the anhydrous ammonia disaster the worst event in Crete's history, or at least
Well, that,
nationally?
and and we had Merrill burning all. I didn't put that in really, but we had a lot going on in 1969, and so that was pretty awful. It was just pretty darn awful, and the deaths. But then Merrill was such a tragedy too. But probably anhydrous was really, I mean, it woke a lot of people up in the safety industry. And I know they slowed the trains down coming through around the curve by then. And, you know, that was very significant.
That's very true. That was a big time in our history. Well, Janet, I think this is about all the time we have today. Is there anything else you want to make sure that we add?
No, but if somebody has some burning questions, email me. I have the Doane email and can give it to you, because I have a lot of files and or if you're related to any of these people and want to know some background about them. But you should try the Crete news, we'll call it news because it's been the news for so long, website, because that's a lot of fun and it's word searchable.
Good.
You can look for yourselves as Doane students.
Those are great suggestions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, everyone. We sure appreciate you all being here today and joining us for Homecoming 2020. And there were so many great people on the call today, including our chair of the Board of Trustees, Jill Smith, and Board of Trustee member Bill Pallett was there too.
Oh, Bill's there. Hi, Bill.
So thank you all for joining us. This webinar has been recorded and it'll be shared online soon. And we have many more speakers and roundtables this week for Homecoming, so be sure and check those out. For example, we have Jim Beatty, the class of 1970, and he'll be discussing his role with the first ever African American Golf Expo and Forum later this week. And then Marty Fye will be hosting on Saturday Breakfast with Doane and speaking with over 12 12 different Doane personalities are going
Oh,
to be
wow.
coming in and out of Marty's show, from coaches to professors to past faculty. Jim Johnson was on today, and he'll be on with Marty for Breakfast with Doane as well. So I encourage you all to take a look at doane.edu/homecoming for more details. And there's still time to register for any of those events and grab those Zoom links as well. So thank you again for joining us, everyone. And as always, go Doane.